Hey everyone. If you've been curious about the potential clinical applications of DMT, watch this next discussion with Timothy Coe and Dr. Andrew Hegle, two executives from Entheon Biomedical, who each have a personal stake in the search for more treatment options. You definitely won't want to miss this one. Hey everyone, and welcome to the Dales Report. I'm thrilled to be joined today by two executives from Entheon Biomedical, a company developing a DMT-assisted therapeutic protocol for substance use disorder. Welcome to CEO Timothy Coe and Chief Science Officer Dr. Andrew Hegle. Thank you guys so much for being here. How are you doing today? And if I could ask, where are each of you joining us from?
Pleasure to be here. I'm calling from a gray but tolerable Vancouver, British Columbia.
I'm also in Vancouver. I'm currently sitting out at UBC.
Yeah, I live in New Westminster, and it's also very gray and foggy here. Days are getting longer, though. That's something to look forward to.
Yeah.
So before we dive into a few questions about Entheon, I'd love to ask a little bit about each of you specifically. So if you don't mind, maybe Timothy, you could go first, giving our audience a quick introduction about your background and, yeah, what brought you into the psychedelic space?
Yeah, totally appreciate it. So I'm Timothy Coe. I'm the CEO of Entheon Biomedical. Sort of broad history of entrepreneurial experience. I was involved in investor relations prior to this, and also in the new and exciting field of blockchain previous. But what actually brought me here was a really sort of like deeply personal mission. My brother was a longtime drug user for about the span of 2 decades. He was pretty mercilessly addicted to substances, and I sort of took over care of my brother in the last 2 years of his life. Really trying to get him into the best services available, psychotherapy, drug treatment centers, ultimately sort of running into medical, sort of medicalized, sort of government-run mental health facilities. But sadly, I lost my brother to a fentanyl overdose in March of 2019. And so, yeah, it gave me a really sort of like fulsome insight into fulsome insight into sort of the failings or the lack of options that were available to people that are suffering from substance use disorder. And without giving too much detail about my personal experience, I did use psychedelics quite extensively to help me deal with some of the issues related to my upbringing, some of the same triggers and stressors that faced my brother, I also faced. And I knew anecdotally that psychedelics had the ability to transform my life and allow me to live a free and unencumbered life. And so, yeah, I made it my mission to seek out those that know more than me to validate whether psychedelics could be useful for treating those with addiction. And pretty quickly, we heard a resounding yes, and then thus proceeded Entheon in terms of, if the answer is yes, how do we get that yes into the hands of the people that need the most?
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that very personal experience. As someone, living in Vancouver in Canada in this time, it kills me that so many people share this experience, that they know someone in their family or their friend group that has passed away in this way. So yeah, thank you for bringing that in. A lot of people I'm a CEO and this is my background, and they don't really want to talk about that. So I really appreciate that. Dr. Hegle, if you could give us a little bit of your background too, that'd be great. Thanks.
Sure. Thanks, Amanda. My background is primarily in molecular biology and neuroscience. I came to UBC as a postdoc something like 15 years ago and sort of dabbled in different areas of neuroscience and receptors and stuff like that. And kind of my lifelong fascination with pharmacology has kind of I drifted into pharmacology. I'm actually currently also adjunct professor of pharmacology here at UBC. I also actually lost a few friends to drugs along the way. And when Timothy came and sort of introduced himself to me, there was a real strong alignment there with the mission. And I joined the company maybe a year and a half ago and have been working to lead up all the clinical pharmacology and various other initiatives that we've been doing on the science front. I also worked for some time in the private sector in the cannabis industry as a sort of regulatory and quality assurance director. So I feel like I have a bit of a broad angle on a lot of the different aspects of bringing a company like this to the world.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's interesting to me, the number of people that have come in with the cannabis experience. Very cool. So now that we're a little bit more familiar with each other, I'd love to ask you about Entheon's role in this space. So how do you think psychedelics could fit into treatment models for substance use disorder? And DMT specifically, I for one was really intrigued when I saw that Entheon was looking at this molecule. Is there a particular reason that you're pursuing DMT?
Yeah, really good question. I think we're in the grips of this sort of moment of high potential for psychedelics to affect a whole spectrum of psychiatric disorders. Very specifically, though, I think that psychedelics have the opportunity to radically disrupt the drug treatment or the substance use disorder space, just based on the presumption that, like those that suffer from substance use disorder often have sort of deep pathologies or habituations that ultimately, they've developed to help mitigate or deal with the distress that may be a product of trauma or sort of life conditions that might, otherwise be sort of too difficult to manage on their own. It is a sort of an adaptation that ultimately has not come to serve them eventually. And I think we know that psychedelics have this ability to generate these hugely profound experiences and insights that I think a lot of the other drug treatment methodologies go towards, whether it's a combination of psychotherapy, 12-step recovery. There's always this push towards a better understanding of motivating factors in order to better understand sort of impulse and understand motivations as well as stressors. Psychedelics, by virtue of their profound sort of insightful mechanism, really do help to, by way of entropy or randomness, allow the individual to recontextualize some belief patterns that might ultimately be detrimental to them. I think the classic psychedelics all possess this. Where we think DMT is hugely beneficial is that, especially for those that are suffering from substance use disorder that may have some very difficult trauma issues that are underpinning that, the notion of maybe engaging someone in a very challenging long-form psychedelic experience like a psilocybin or an LSD or an ayahuasca, that comes with some of the difficulties of, hey, if this individual does encounter something that is potentially re-traumatizing, is there any mechanism to stop that process? Well, with DMT, there is, just by virtue of its sort of unique pharmacokinetics that Andrew will get into. We do have that ability to modulate, titrate, and end the experience if medically necessary. And we think that that's a particularly useful feature that for actual in-clinic use is something that physicians we've heard want to have available to them. And it gives us that flexibility to, potentially even structure in different treatment paradigms where rather than sort of a build up to a large, potentially super information dense session, we're sort of modularly where we intersperse preparatory psychotherapy integration with psychedelic sessions, shorter form psychedelic sessions, but it gives that flexibility to, sort of introduce, have an experience, integrate and unpack in a way that is maybe a little less sort of into the deep frigid waters of, a full blown ayahuasca experience.
Gotcha. So like much more
just to add to that, because that's a great answer. Just to add to that, so when you think about LSD, psilocybin, you're thinking 6, 8, sometimes 12 hours, depending on the dose. Some other things like ibogaine can be days. And DMT is really unique in the fact that it something like half an hour metabolism. So it comes in and goes out very fast. It's very powerful. It provides a really intense but short experience. And by administering it in the clinic, we can kind of give it to you for as long as needed. And some patients may find that an hour is sufficient, or maybe 2 hours, or maybe somewhere in between is enough for the psychotherapist who's there to help them really make the most of that powerful experience. And then you turn it off and it goes down, and within 15, 20 minutes, you're back to normal. And that we feel is a really important mechanism for safety going forward with psychedelic treatment.
Wow. Yeah. I imagine that also has tremendous value for someone who's, trying to pursue this kind of treatment. Something we hear a lot is how expensive it's going to be to want to sit in a clinic with two practitioners for 6 hours at a time. So I was going to ask about your trial, but actually I think this is a better opportunity to talk a little bit more about the process you're involved in now. So let's say DMT makes its way all through the clinical trial process for this administration. How do you imagine it being administered? I'm not picturing people smoking DMT. Would it involve psychotherapy? And given the shorter duration that we were just talking about, I imagine it's going to be more cost effective too.
Yeah, maybe I'll start with the sort of
Sure.
clinical side of that. So we definitely envision this to be an in-clinic treatment. But because of that short session length, I mean, yeah, people might not even need to take the whole day off, right?
Wow.
I mean, they can come in for a few hours and be released as an outpatient. And that I think is huge. Yeah, I mean, we are exploring other forms of administration, but the intravenous model definitely allows us to be very precise in terms of dosing. We can adjust the dose in real time according to the responses, and we can get into some of the measurement tools that we're looking at for biomarkers as well. But eventually, what we'd like to see is the psychiatrist who's there doing the therapeutic. You know, we do the drug intervention sort of in the middle of a longer therapeutic session, and they'll be able to modulate or change the dose or stop the session as needed, depending on their specific interaction with that particular patient. Every treatment will be a little bit different because everyone's a little different.
Yeah.
Wow.
And to echo what Andrew said about sort of necessity of within a medical context, yeah, these are really profound experiences. And I think it's very important in order to optimize that and also to guard against some of the potential negative pitfalls that might happen as a result of someone experiencing something that's out of their normal context. We do envision this as within a medicalized setting. And we do think inherently psychedelic assisted psychotherapy is with the inclusion of psychotherapy. But from a practicality perspective or commercial applicability, the sort of current paradigm that is presumed to use a long-form psychedelic like psilocybin, it is just a difficult commercial reality where much of the cost comes from, as you mentioned, Amanda, that oversight, having a trained physician nurse on site to oversee an individual that's going through this trip. And then, with the sort of like trailing effects that may persist beyond the acute effects of it, it's a difficult sort of clinic model to envision. But with DMT, like Andrew was mentioning, you can have these profound experiences, and then depending on what the sort of therapeutic protocol tied to that is, potentially have that person come down while those insights are still fresh, be able to unpack and integrate that stuff. There's nothing more sort of beautiful than someone on the heels or on the trailing side of a DMT experience with these fresh insights in mind, being able to potentially integrate that sort of in the same day without it running into 2 a.m. and saying, well, my wife is really mad that I've been, watching you trip for a while. I think it does open up a whole spectrum of commercial opportunities that we think are more sort of readily sort of usable within the sort of developing field of psychedelic psychotherapy.
Very cool. I like also that you mentioned that if a person gets more comfortable with the treatment, that you could sort of potentially give them longer lasting treatments. And this is something when I spoke with Rick Strassman for my upcoming book, he talked to me about, the future of DMT treatment and envisioning this sort of thing. So yeah, very cool. So I want to ask a little bit about your ongoing clinical trial, your phase 1 clinical trial for nicotine addiction. What stage are you at so far with that research? And how's that going?
Well, we're actually just on the cusp of beginning it. The first patient will be kind of entering the clinic very, very soon. We expect the trial to continue through the summer. It's going to be taking place in the Netherlands, actually, at a really top-tier institution called the Center for Human Drug Research. And they've been around, I think, since the 80s. They do early stage pharmacology, and they have a really great track record of translating these results back to the FDA, and they're just a global leader in this type of research. We're looking at 50 patients over a really nice dose range, and we're going to be using this really cool validated tool called the NeuroCart to look at all sorts of different measures of brain activity, everything from pupil dilation to how much you're swaying back and forth, as well as things like memory and cognitive tests, all sorts of questionnaires, all really getting to the understanding how this drug works at the entire sort of spectrum of the dose range, finding what's kind of most the most promising doses to key in on for future studies. And then in addition, we're going to be looking at some exploratory measures with EEG, so measuring actual brain activity on a continuous basis. And this is something we're also doing in our other clinical trial as a means of looking for new biomarkers for understanding in real time where patients are in this very subjective experience that the clinicians who are in the room can actually see and maybe understand exactly kind of where they are on that sort of, on the curve, on their trip. And so we're very excited to have that coming along. And I think that's about it. Yeah.
I noticed, you mentioned that it was in the Netherlands. I think, so that's obviously because of this very reputable institution, not because it's easier to work with these substances in Europe. Is it, it's not, has nothing to do with the regulations? I'm just curious.
Well, it's as controlled drug as it is in North America. Still all very much, we have all the necessary approvals. The Netherlands definitely does have a more, I guess, permissive culture for psychedelics. We know they have truffles and mushrooms, and it's a very progressive society. It makes things a little bit easier, certainly. We have some ties to the institution through some of our scientific advisors. So we know they're very good. And that's kind of how we ended up.
Totally. I didn't mean to question. I think that's awesome. I think that's very exciting. Timothy, did you have anything you wanted to add to that, or?
No, just I'm saying, sort of echoing what Andrew said. I think the clinical trials all follow a similar sort of globally accepted standard. So of course everything's done to the rigor of that standard. But half the battle, we're deep in the field with regard to psychedelics, so we all know that the inherent safety and sort of what they do. But a lot of the battle is, I think, as we've all experienced in the early stages of this industry, is to communicate. What is a psychedelic? What are some of the effects? And as Andrew mentioned, I think there is a cultural barrier that's just a bit lessened by virtue of working within a sort of societal construct that has that socialized into their understanding already. So we've been really amazed at how adept the group at CHDR has been in terms of understanding psychedelics. And so that just removes some of the friction for us in terms of, having to describe what it is and them not saying, well, that's crazy. They've already seen it sort of in their day-to-day lives. Oh yeah, it's sort of similar to the truffle things that are being sold at the shops. So that's certainly
And one thing I'll add to that too is that this clinic has a lot of experience in other serotonergic drugs, so drugs that act on the same system in the body, as well as things like cannabis and ketamine, and they're really excited as well to be exploring DMT.
Awesome. Well, I'll look forward to seeing the results of that. That's, really cool. I think the way people are exploring nicotine addiction with psychedelics is definitely, as a former smoker, I think I just passed my 18-month mark.
Congratulations. I hit 20 years recently, and that was huge.
Awesome. So I've got one final question for you guys. What are some milestones Entheon hopes to reach in 2022? And then if you wanted to maybe touch on a few longer term milestones. I know the narrative we're hearing a lot in psychedelics these days is that this is not the short term game that people thought cannabis would be. It's drug development. It's a long play. So if you could touch on a few of those things, that'd be great.
Totally. Just to sort of answer that backwards last question first. This is it's a very different industry. It's maybe a different industry than what is potentially expected, I guess, of certain investors, where there is a demand for sort of near-term catalysts that are going to skyrocket revenue. For those that are sort of more adept or more sort of socialized to traditional pharma and biotech type of sort of industries, the time horizon is that much longer, but there are still like significant de-risking and value appreciation events that take place that follow a well-worn pathway where it's very understandable that as you progress through these stages of clinical development, the end game is still potentially many years away, but with each step of validation, such as what we're doing with our clinical trials, that should be seen as the company doing sort of what it needs to do to establish that firm, super empirically generated basis of data upon which to build and pursue other indications or development. So it's a bit of a different sort of time metric in terms of where the potential payoff is, but in terms of the potential, I think we all know that the psychedelic industry has the ability to radically disrupt traditional psychiatry, and especially given that the sort of current treatment methodologies that are used to address things like depression and drug addiction are sort of woefully ill-equipped to really make an impact there. I think, psychedelics really have that potential, even at this early stage, to radically sort of like capture market share. And so, just ask sort of investors to look at the companies, what they're doing, how large is their addressable market, and are they, pursuing this on a strong basis of scientific evidence? And I think they'll see the huge potential. For us, our milestones are sort of not too sort of difficult to understand. I think the initiation of our clinical trial is certainly primary among them. As Andrew mentioned, it is super comprehensive. In our estimation, the most comprehensive study of DMT to date, looking at not only basic safety pharmacology, but also a really deep interest in biomarkers. We have this very deep interest in biomarkers because we do think that, within the world of traditional psychiatry, so much is left to subjective interpretation, what the patient tells the physician and how they interpret that. Well, we think that there is a basis of maybe taking a more empirical approach to that. And so we are also on the sort of the verge of initiating our EBIQ 101 trial, which is focused on biomarkers associated with ketamine administration. We're taking a genetics perspective there and in an EEG perspective there to just see if there are certain variances in terms of genetic composition, presence or absence of specific gene markers that may dictate whether a person has a differential response to ketamine, as well as looking at the EEG. That's the sort of like the silly looking cap that goes on top of the head to measure what actually happens during the ketamine experience. Are there certain thresholds that are crossed that will give an indication of a certain depth of immersion? And we think this has application not only to, the tools that we create, but we think there's a broader application across industry, because as the psychedelic industry evolves, we see the sort of seed planting going on in terms of all of the potential molecules to address all of the potential psychiatric indications. If we're to believe that this will all come to fruition, we'll have a very lush garden in terms of the options that are available to physicians to prescribe to patients. What we want to do at Entheon is to develop tools that not only serve our own internal development, but also service the industry, where 5 or 10 years from now, a physician is brought with the opportunity as well as the decision point of, hey, I have a patient presenting with, a depression diagnosis. Well, of the molecules that are now approved for treating this person, on what basis can I inform that? On what basis can I make that choice? And so we want to develop those tools that help inform that process, whether it's on the basis of genetics, baseline EEG phenotypes, or baseline EEG neurophysiological structures. We want to help inform that choice so that, it's a very rare and sort of hallowed opportunity when someone says, I'm tired of feeling sick and tired. I really want to get well. It takes a lot of bravery to say, I'm admitting that I'm seeking help right now. We don't want to squander that opportunity. We want to, generate the most potential positive outcome from that experience. And so, we're developing tools that will hopefully help provide some insights into how to prescribe, hopefully provide some insights into how to monitor treatment, as well as monitor post-treatment effects, so that along the patient care continuum, physicians can objectively say, hey, we're seeing improvements, we're seeing a degradation of improvement, and I want to help nudge you in the right ways so that we can keep you well and make the best of that opportunity.
Wow. That's
I just want to add that these biomarkers, it's akin to taking your brain's fingerprint, and ideally we're going to get to that point in personalized medicine where every patient will have an optimum strategy that their physician helps them with using their genetics and their brain patterns. Say, hey, this is the drug for you. Maybe it's DMT, maybe it's ketamine. For different modes. For addiction, we do think it's going to be DMT, and then tailoring that treatment to that fingerprint, and that's the personalized medicine we're going for. And all of this is really, in my mind, there to improve the safety. We know these drugs can be safe, but we also know that there are risks involved. And I think physicians especially want to know, how do we make that risk as low as possible? So I see our job is to pave the way for that, entirely safe therapeutic psychedelic experience.
Wow, yeah, the risk profile, definitely it's something that's so important to talk about, because if you introduce someone who's already in a vulnerable state, as you know, I'm preaching to the choir here, that you don't want to make things worse for them. You don't want to give them more trauma than they came in with. So yeah, that's so important. I think looking at that genetic profile and how that works. And I also like that you refer to it as the brain's fingerprint. As a journalist, I'm always looking for ways to sort of explain something in a way that's a little bit more digestible. So thank you. I appreciate that a lot.
Brain print.
Totally. It's good. It's good. I like it. Well, it's been great getting to know more about each of you, a little bit more about your company. Do you have any closing remarks on where you see things heading, just on a broader scale as far as psychedelics?
Yeah, I think we already touched on it. We're in that weird overlap of like huge potential, but in early days. For the investor community, I think, the people that we talk to, they understand that and they see the value that is potentially there. We really do think that over the course of the next, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, huge sort of de-risking events will take place. But, we're all sort of in the same boat where we're in those early legs of generating that data. That being said, we're pursuing really strong sort of scientific hypotheses on the basis of super comprehensive literature review. And, we're proving out that data. We're developing that data as we speak. So, I see this as a really opportune moment for people to get involved in an industry that potentially, can have a huge sort of proportion of the sort of market share in terms of treating these disorders that are so, I guess, apparent and sort of urgent to treat. And so we're working as fast as we can, but as diligently as we need to really bring these products to market. And we just want to thank everyone for wanting to learn more about us. And we invite everyone to sort of stay informed, sign up to our socials, our email campaigns, because we're always working on stuff that we think is not only just super cool, but we think has the benefit or the potential to have a huge societal benefit. And I think, those in the industry, we're all sort of motivated by a similar thing, which is like, hey, can we actually do something here that makes the lives of the people around us that bit better?
Beautifully said.
And also, you can go to clinicaltrials.gov and see all the details for our ketamine study that's currently about to kick off. I don't think the DMT trial is on there yet, but should be soon. So between that and our website, anyone who's interested can find out lots of details and how to get involved.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. It's been a pleasure having you on, and hopefully we can have you on the show again soon. Have a great rest of your day.
Okay. Thanks, Amanda.